My dad is 94 years old, right? Still very sharp. Just talked to him yesterday because my mom, they're still married, strangely enough. It was her expected to live this long. Why do you think that is? You want to take a guess at that? What's that? It did. There you go. That was a kicker. When do you think his parents died? My grandparents.
Yeah, no.
When?
Right now?
Yeah, I think it's working out.
Remember, know that. Demographics, right? Quick thing to share with you guys. My son, who graduated from UC Santa Cruz, right, whose mascot is the Slug, which is really funny. Is that what I called him when he was growing up? That was his nickname. Really? Okay. So anyway, so it was funny. He was a biogenetic major. And he learned, this goes back to the people who died in their 60s, relative to the 1960s and 70s, is that suddenly there was this huge concern. Why do we have suddenly men in particular dying of heart attacks in the 1960s and 70s? That wasn't cigarettes. You know what they thought? Well, that's kind of where they thought it started there. They're like, red meat, right? Oh, it's too much red meat. They're all dying from eating too much red meat. So they kept going. Then the cigarettes, then it was alcohol. It was all these different things. You know what the real reason turned out to be?
Yes.
More men were living to be in their 60s than ever before. It was just more men. There you go. They lived longer. So yeah, so they lived longer. So therefore, they were dying at a greater rate because they had all hit the expiration button at that point. Their parents before them died in their 50s and 40s and so on, things like that. So back to our demographic, my parents' demographic, which is baby boomer demographic, they're living into their 80s and 90s and pushing 100. So what happens with that? What's gone up exponentially based on people living longer? Incapacity. Incapacity. So it isn't like a sudden anomaly, it's cause and effect. Better healthcare, better food, or incapacity. That seems to be an oxymoron. Okay, so let's talk about probes, right? So how many people here have a trust? Any of you who have children, please set up a trust. It's back to what our young lady was saying earlier, you know, if you don't have a trust or if you don't have a will, write something on a napkin because it's a template for people to go on, right? Now, what happens if you have a will? Let's say you had a will. Does that get you out of probate?
No, still gotta go.
Still got to go to probate.
It's a want.
Right. So does that keep you out of conflict? You four are siblings here. You're my children. I have a will. And what do? I leave it all to you. You're my oldest daughter. You took care of me. The rest of them went off and had a life. You're a little angry about that. So I left it all to you because I was giving you that. You guys going to be okay with that? Okay, so you have one sister on your side. The other two didn't even answer. They're looking down at their shoes right now going, how do I get the money? Right? All right, so I'm going to give you guys kind of a thing here. I know I sound glib. I'm kind of like, I should be spinning a wheel and calling out numbers, playing bingo today, right? But the point is if I told you in the tone of the reality, you would all go, this is the worst conversation we ever had. All right. So what's happening here is that the demographic, the baby boomer demographic, and it's growing. Sign off. My escrow officer calls me up, goes, Houston, we have a problem. What's going on? Well, we just found out that the fourth brother, Tobias, is deceased. I'm like, yes. I'm like, so wait a minute, this has been open for 4 months. Did he just die? Did he die after we started escrow? No. He died in 1996. Now, you three didn't think to mention that. He's on title, by the way. You didn't get a signature for him in the contract. So therefore, you, my buyer, can buy 75% of a property in Tahoe. What did we do? What happens? So Tobias says probate. How many people think probate? Because it's 25% of those hanging out there. Who's afraid to hold up their hand right now? I like that. All right, nobody wants to commit to anything. What's he talking about? Okay, here's the kicker. The weird part is that nobody mentioned anything, yet you're on title with your wife. This is your lovely wife over here. You guys should probably talk a bit. So you're passed away. You know, there's two reasons you're not talking. Because not only did he die in 1996 with you in title with him as joint tenants, you had divorced 4 years before that. And nobody took you off title. And Tobias, he's a good dynamic looking guy. He has a new wife. Jules, you're the wife this time. There you go. Right? So I have right of survivorship to the ex-spouse, the newer wife, right? They were only married for a few years. Does she get the windfall from being married to him in that short period of time? These are things we're all juggling in escrow, right? And the buyer's like, when do I get to go to my Tahoe house? It was supposed to be that weekend because this is a Friday. All right, so here's how we avoided probate. Because it should have been probated. First thing asked is, I got to see the divorce papers as quickly as possible. So they rally, they find the wife, the divorced wife, who submits the divorce papers to me. And lo and behold, she was compensated for her interest in the property through the divorce. Great, you've already been made whole. 30 years ago, guess what the value of a property in Tahoe 30 years ago was? A whole lot less than it is today. She's like, cha-ching, right? So what happens here is then the new wife, I talked to her. Well, as luck would have it, there was kids, grandkids involved. So the new wife and the former wife still would run into each other at birthday parties and things like that. So fingers crossed, they will negotiate this out. I had them on the phone and said, this is the only way we get from point A to point B is if we do an affidavit of death of joint tenant. His interest transfers to you, you're still entitled as to that other portion, and that we cut the proceeds of the sale to you, you sign the deed and an amendment to that contract to make sure that everybody's obligated to the property, and you endorse that check over to the new wife, less whatever tax consequences there are going to be. She did. We managed to get this done over the weekend and close that transaction on the following Monday. How did we do that? Communicating. That's why you call me, right? I've got a problem. We need to work out an issue here, right? Because everybody else was like probate, 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 probate. I'm like, time out. We may have a way to go. Yes, ma'am.
That's if we have the escrow with your company.
Well, well, so, all right. So you beat me. The last slide is don't open your escrows anywhere else. I'm the guy. Okay. That is absolutely true. However, I am a free second opinion. I would gladly have given you that scenario or as close I could have, whether it was my deal or not. Why? Because that's the way I'm wired. I want you to be successful. Then I want you to remember that I helped you and come back.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. David. No, what it was is that she had already been compensated for her interest in that property, but never executed a deed to remove that interest, right? Now, the problem was is if she executes a deed today, you can't convey it to a dead man. So he was already gone, right? So it was, again, it was happenstance. It was a comedy of errors, which we're seeing all the time now. And I'll jump to a little bit more of the chase here. I'm seeing this sort of weird stuff more and more. And more recently, not so much the young gentleman dying 30 years ago, is because people are doing stuff themselves. They're not calling anybody. They go, I have a question. I'll Google it. And then they read the part that they understand and go, I got it. I'm now an expert. And they execute documents. And then I realized exponentially, I became that much more valuable to the industry because I fix it. all my job is now is fixing mistakes done by people who think they know more than the system, right? And I did a very similar presentation in front of the Alameda County Bar Association of Estate Planning Attorneys. There were 72 people on that call. I've never had so many follow-up questions, people blowing up my phone because most of them went, oh my God, I've been doing it wrong for 30 years. So can we rely, are there any attorneys in this room? Can we rely on attorneys? There you go, yes.
What happened to these kids?
So what was really interesting about that is that it bypassed, right? Because under the law, it goes to the ex-wife through the joint tenancy rule. Now, if she decided to fight it, right, or create an issue, then that transaction would have stopped because she wouldn't have cooperated, and the ex-wife or the ex-wife and the new wife would have had to fight it out on the court as to the proceeds of his percentage, right? But so here's succession. So we're going to go through succession here in a second. Succession is spouse, even if it wasn't joint tenancy, all right? If you go through probate, let's say he's probated, it would go to spouse. So we shortcutted it through ex-wife who still had the record interest.
So the wife is above the children?
Yes, wife is above children. Okay, unless you hold your interest in a divided manner, right? So Jules, I'm sorry, Jules, I'm going to just pick on you all day today. You and I are married. Thank you for lowering your standards. So, but what if we own that property 50-50? That eradicates joint tenancy because you can't have a divided interest in joint tenancy, right? So it's 50-50, it's now tenancy in common. Back to your point, it may split down. If we both had kids either from previous marriages or present marriages, let's say I die, my interest would potentially go to my children. Okay, unless she claims a community property interest, and then again, it gets kind of muddled and fought out in court. That's why we communicate on these things and find how do we get through these, right? I hope I helped answer the question a little bit. That's actually the real story was the property had been in the family for generations. They were the last generation to have it, and essentially their kids were like not that interested anymore. They were all aging, and they decided, let's sell it. It's at its top of the market, which made sense, right? Which then trickle down effect would go to their children and such that way. But the killer part of this is that no one mentions that Tobias is dead. Not only did they not have the 4 months to actually mention in escrow, they had 30 years to figure it out, right?
Yes, as the agent, I should have looked at the prelim and was there a trustee on it? Or were all 4 of them having to sign it? And that should have been caught like ditto, right? At the very beginning.
Read the prelim. How many people here rely on their escrow officer to inform them that there's a problem on a prelim, right? If you're afraid to put up your hand, you should be, because you need to read the prelim. Read it, digest it, match it up with the people that you're dealing with to make sure you don't have a problem. David, again. Oh boy, that's way out of my ballpark, buddy. CPA, thank you. Yeah, I would go with the CPA. So here's kind of a funny thing. Tobias dies, we're totally off the rails now. Tobias dies 30 years ago. His interest should have been dealt with at that time. All right. Upon his death, the assessor states that you have only X amount of days to deal with that death. Right. The fact that it was just forgotten or not dealt with really sends them sideways. By the way, my son, who has the biogen degree, he couldn't get a job in the biogen world. So he's now an appraiser and assessor for the county of San Mateo. This is where I get all this stuff. He's like, oh yeah, we've got 20 years to go back and reassess the property. I'm like, great. 2 children, might as well be 12, right? Because the moment somebody dies, they can get along famously as you know, while you're alive. The moment you die, teeth come out and everybody's fighting over something as trivial as a cookie jar. And I say a cookie jar because we had a cookie jar that was holding up the sale of our house in a transaction, right? So we had to say, okay, You all agree that the house needs to sell? Yes. Okay, let's put the house in the cookie jar aside. We sell the house, funds go into a trust account. You guys fight over that later. You can take 10 years to fight it out for all we care, but we've closed the transaction. So they can get an order to sell the property. However, contingent upon court date. It might only be one court date, but once they get it, we can go forward, right? So don't sit there and go, oh man, it's gonna be 18 months. It doesn't have to be. Yes.
Question. Was the fight over the cookies inside or the jar?
You know, I would say that's the most important here lesson here today is that cookies are more important. So I don't know, you're gonna go to the thing. Is it the peanut butter or the chocolate, right? So anyway, so this is what we're up against. But if you run into a probate situation, don't think it's over and you have to wait 18 months. There are ways to kick that can down the road. I just can't tell you exactly what that timing is going to be. Yes, ma'am.
If you have a will, you still have to go to.
Oh, there we go. You beat me to the next question. Here we go. Does having a will avoid probate?
Is this California or the whole country?
This is California. All right, so it does not. The answer is no. Okay, having only a will not not a trust guarantee your estate, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, you have to still go through probate. It's a template for which the courts to walk upon, right? You have a will, they go, great, this is the descendants' wishes. We're going to adhere to them as best we can. But remember, back to my 4 children over here, they're going to fight it out. Things may be negotiated or changed. All right. I've had people say, well, what do I care? I'm dead. Right. And that may be true. I'm like, I've got 3 boys, right? I love them both dearly. So let's keep that in mind. All right. No, that's not true. So anyway, no, it's really funny is that I'm going to ask you guys questions. I know everybody's hands going up and down here. Again, how many people have more than one child? Keep it up for a moment. Okay, keep it up. So how many of you love your children equally? See, it's funny, some hands went down. That's kind of sad. Here's the other part. Now, this is the reality check. How many of you love them, or not love them, like them the same? Right? If you don't like your child the same, put your hand down. Right? I have a favorite. It's my youngest son. He is my favorite. I love my 3 dearly. Right? Okay, but here's the big question. If you're setting up a trust and dealing with this, who do you trust the most? Right? Be pragmatic about these things because in our world, it's the part that isn't pragmatic that slows us down. When baby boomers appoint the eldest son to act on the trust or be in the head of probate, that is the worst thing that can happen. My brother was the oldest, is the biggest 4-letter word you can imagine. All right. My parents appointed him the head of the trust, right? I'm the youngest of 3. Until my brother did what my brother does, and my parents amended that trust. And they appointed me the head of the trust. Why? I did talk to my parents about my brother before. I'm like, you do know what I do for a living, but I'm the baby. I can't possibly be smart enough to handle that stuff, right? So that's why I didn't get the nod the first time. It took me 30 years in the industry to convince them. So
there's another element. Thank you for sharing that. I have 3 kids. I love them. And we put our trust at the beginning 10 years ago on my oldest son because he was the smartest. He was going to college, etc.
yes.
But the minute he got married, it changed. The second is exactly the same. So we moved our trust as trustee now to my daughter. We're not married. We're hoping for something different than the
Which does.
But you know what? And congratulations on that, because look what you did. You saw the situation, you adapted to the situation, and you remained pragmatic about it. You went, wow, this took a turn for the worse. Let's go here. But keep your thumb on that pulse. If you set up your trust 10 or 15 years ago, revisit it, amend it. Things change. People fall out of favor. They become whatever they become, right? Don't pass away, then everybody's held hostage by a bad situation or a bad judgment call earlier on. And I can tell you this, my parents retired in Tahoe and then put their home up for sale in Tahoe and moved to Nevada. Do you think they called me and told me their house was for sale? I still got the thing. Hey, kid, I didn't want to bother you. I'm like, okay, at that point, I was 55 years old. I wasn't a kid anymore. All right. The second part of it is that I could have actually recommended a real estate agent for them to help them out. Right. The other part is that my parents had a trust while they were in California. They moved to Arizona. Dad, you got to amend the trust. You had to draw a new trust, old house in, new house, old house out, new house in, right? Yeah, I'll get to it. My dad's in his 80s at this point. I'm like, I'm not sure you're getting to dinner tonight, so you need to get this done. Repeated calls, right? Didn't do it. I made the appointment for them to then sit down with an attorney in Arizona to redo their trust to make sure all the assets were done. And the reason for this is that there's multiple things. And I'll give you a really quick situation to this, is that if any of your parents or loved ones or whatever hold real estate in California, but they live out of state and they're probated out of state, that state does not have reciprocity in California. It cannot distribute real estate that's in California through an out-of-state probate. Meaning that, I'm going to look at you, the house, the $2.2 million home in, Willow Glen is distributed to you via probate in Arizona. You're reprobating here in California. It's an ancillary probate case. There's no avoiding it. And when do we discover it? When somebody calls me at the 11th hour. Yes.
I had a situation where the woman had a house here in California, but she was living in New Jersey.
Okay.
So she died and she had a probate and all that in New Jersey, and they wanted us to sell the house here.
Yeah.
Of course, when we tried to sell it, we find out we couldn't.
Right.
Because her living trust or whatever was in New Jersey,
Mhm.
it had to be transferred here. A lawyer had to advertise, do all that probate things, which took 6 months for the lawyer to get it done. Finally, we were able to sell.
There you go. You guys, thank you so much for saying that, because that is the situation, right? So the moment, and I've talked to people before, they go, no, it's all good. My parents were probated in some other state. And I'm like, okay, well, we're looking at 4 months, right? Yes, sir.
That's the one. Number two, some of these kids are gonna need all the charity. Now, you don't have to. If you do that, and the kids still hang around while you're dying, and they're not waiting for you to die a little faster. Hey.
Well, then
they love you.
they're good kids, right? There you go. So we just solved all the world's problems here, right then, that right there. David.
So why don't I just make?
Wow. Okay. Do not do that. All right. David, did you do that? Okay. All right. Again, I've got 3 kids, right? I could do that. My wife and I can go, well, let's just be fair, right? Being fair is not being pragmatic. It's meaning that you want to avoid the fight, right? Now you could do, like the gentleman said back there, maybe you don't tell them anything and you go, hey, when we die, it's in the safe, just pull it out. You'll figure it out after that. And then they all go through the shock factor, right? Or back to the point, I know my 3 boys, they got along great growing up. They're all smart, they're all educated, that's fantastic. But the problem is that I have one son who lives in Europe, so he's too far away. And he'll say, hey, I'll do whatever you guys want to do. I'm like, okay, that's not decision making, that's just deflecting. My middle son is hell on wheels. He's the guy that you want on a desert island if you want to survive, but you don't want him handling your trust. Okay, so the baby gets the trust. Why? Because he's kind. He's pragmatic. He'll split everything equally. So again, this may be a lesson for you guys, but it really reflects back into what we do for a living, because you will encounter trusts and probates that are manned by people who are unreasonable. The moment that happens, let me know. Part of the reason I tell you that is because I've talked to people, right? I've talked to children, I talked to buyers, I talked to sellers to resolve issues of conflict, because we are a neutral third party. You are representing one side of the fence. So you're looked at as either the enemy or somebody who's trying to get something. We're looked as the facilitators. Now, by the way, that makes it sound like we're a non-for-profit business, which is not true. So when I say we are a neutral third party, my goal is to move that down the road to close, right? So we get paid. Yes, ma'am.
I want to ask about the opposite. You have a will on the trust, and you're in California, and the property is outside of California.
Right.
Can you just move that property into the trust, or you mention it in the will, do you have to also open probate in other states?
That's a great question, and I don't know the laws of probate in those other states. And it may be, by the way, so I think I just answered my own question, because did you guys catch that? It's the reverse. So somebody has property here, they set it all up, but they move to another state. Can they kind of do it in this, or I'm sorry, they moved to here, but they have property in another state. I'm thinking the reason attorneys think they have reciprocity in California is because they have reciprocity in surrounding states around New Mexico and Arizona. So they're like, hey, this is not a big deal until you trip over the line into California, and now it's a whole new thing. Right. So I think you're okay in those cases. You know what? That's a pretty simple Google, and now I will check that out. So next time we talk, I'll know. Any other questions? Cool. Let's move on a little bit here. All right. Does joint tenancy avoid probate? Well, let's say, I love the yes. Yeah, for the first person to die, it does, right? And it's right. So Tobias, you and I are married. Okay. Welcome to our world. So here you go. So here's the deal. I'm going to tell you a true story, right? So you and I, we get married. We buy a home in 1981. We hold title as joint tenants, which means you die, I get it. I die, you get it. All right. But you didn't know what kind of person I was when you married me. And I'm like, hey, don't worry about it. I'll make all the money, right? And I was a wheeler dealer. I went out and I was really pulling the wool over a lot of people's eyes, not paying feds, not paying state, not paying liens. I'm sued always from Sunday. You know nothing about it. I kept you sheltered. This is a true story, by the way, people. And then I die in 2005. And nothing really happens because do the joint tenancy thing. You get the property. You're like, okay, I got the property now. You go to sell it. Title company runs title, brings it all up, right? All those liens, all those judgments. You're like, who the hell did I marry, right? You knew nothing about it. And those liens and judgments were far more than anything you would clear from selling it. Let's say you were going to get $500,000 in equity. The liens and judgments were over $600,000 in debt, right? And ticking up because none of the liens and judgments were paid. What do we do? Cry. I love that. So do those liens and judgments have to be taken care of? Do they have to be paid through either community property law, or do they attach to the property? How many people think they need to be paid? All right. How many people don't think they need to be paid? See, it's so funny. I don't have all names going up here. So some people are like, I'm not voting. All right. The real question, the real answer is joint tenancy is a contract between he and I. It existed before those liens and judgments. So therefore my interest passes to him without attachment of those liens and judgments. Then you get to go, see you later, suckers. I'm not paying you. And you walk away with $500,000 in equity. Oh, really? He gets all the equity. They don't get paid because they were subsequent to the contract of joint tenancy, right? Now, what would have happened if we changed in any time between there? We set up a trust. We did anything to change that contract, those liens and judgments could or would attach. But since we had a joint tenancy contract, they did not, right? And everybody's probably going, this doesn't sound real. I saved the case law. I have the case law on my desktop. So if anybody's interested, I will fire it off to you. Yes, ma'am.
That joint tenants property was in the trust.
Mhm.
Would that again not be touched?
No, the liens and judgments would attach at that point. Yes, David. What's that? Oh, God. All right. You're opening up a can of worms, David. All right. So I purposely don't even put that on my slideshow. It's okay. So what it is, you guys have heard of the transfer on death deed? It's TOD or TODD, right? Started in 2016, January of 2016, and it was a tester law, right? And they said, okay, we're going to let this run 5 years. So it's in January of 2021. They went, okay, is it going to turn into law, or are we going to abolish it? Is it going to sunset, not go anywhere? Well, since 2016 to the present, it did get signed into law, but it was altered and altered and altered and altered because they kept finding holes in it. Now, recently, they did an amendment to that law that went, okay, we're going to just make all the ones that happened before okay because there was too many twists and turns for people to handle. Here's the problem with the transfer on death deed. It was created for the best of intentions, right? You're a single woman, right? Or you're a married woman, but you have a piece of property, your husband dies, you divorce or what have you, and you have one child. This will be that gentleman next to you here. I'm not sure how that worked out. So anyway, really? Come on, you guys. All right. So what happens is you do a transfer on death deed because it was set up for people of small estates. So they don't have to pay for a trust, right? Trusts are very expensive. Welcome to California and Silicon Valley. It's very expensive, right? But you only have one property. You have one child. I'm going to leave my property to my child. So you name him in there, son, great. You pass away, it transfers to him. He does an affidavit of death, of transfer on death deed. Voila. Avoid probate, right? No trust, passes through. Best of intentions. Okay. The other part is that if you wanted him to have the property, why don't you just do a parent to child transfer, add him in as a joint tenant, avoid all that mess. Okay. Second part of this is that, remember, it came in 2016. What hit us in March of 2019, people? So guess what the hot ticket was when people were in the hospital during COVID and not expected to make it? Everybody went, oh my God, what are you going to do? Mom's going to die. Let's Google it. Transfer on death deed. Bingo. So we have all these people executing transfer on death deeds while in the hospital under imminent exposure of death. Can we accept a deed executed based on those circumstances? No. The other part of it is that nobody considered here, even in the best of circumstances, right, is that you die and that property goes to him because that was your only son. But you're the only one knows that that's your only son, right? But what if we discover later on that you had other kids, but you only gave it to him and they didn't know? All right. So they come back and go, when did mom execute that? How many days before she died? Could be void. So we have capacity questions there. If there's any looming potential of incapacity when you're executing and transfer on death deed, forget it. We can't use it. The other part is that here's another loophole in the transfer on death deed. I'm going to use you guys for a second, right? So you're my children. This is fantastic. Transfer on death deed. I have one home. I have two kids, son and daughter, right? I'll leave it to them. But then I become disenchanted over a period of a few years because they don't visit me anymore. And I don't get to see the grandchildren. But I start going to a local pub. I meet my buddy Tobias, who's strangely enough my ex-husband in this case. So put it together, folks. We're going to get there. All right. So what happens is that he's my drinking buddy, right? Because I don't see my kids anymore. So I'm just complaining to Tobias. He goes, those are lousy children. They don't bring the kid. No, they don't. So what do? I execute a transfer on death deed to my buddy Tobias because I can give it to my friend, right? So then I'm now in an, right? So now I'm starting to lose capacity because I'm getting older, or I'm an alcoholic, thanks to Tobias, right? And we keep going on. So now I meet somebody else. I start square dancing, right? I meet a young lady. Boy, this is great. Square dancing, we're doing our thing. Transfer on death deed, right? Now I'm Oprah Winfrey. Everybody gets a transfer on death deed. All right, under the law, the way the law's written, because they anticipated changes, the last transfer on death deed is the valid one. All right? But remember, I'm getting older. Obviously, I've been drinking a lot. She's considerably younger than I. Why would she be involved with me? Because I got a house, maybe? I don't know. Or I'm suffering from incapacity. We can see how far we can go with this, right? The thing is that none of you know that I've executed multiple transfer on death deeds. Who's getting in the middle of that? Now, I've seen probably 70 transfer on death deeds over the last 6 or 7 years, right? I've closed on 10% of them. 10%, guys. Why? Because of these loopholes, because of these potential problems, mostly based on incapacity. So if you get a prelim, and I'm going to say this to you, right? If somebody says, hey, my parents died, I have a transfer on death deed, walk away. No, don't walk away. Call me, I'll check it out. We'll look at it because every transaction is worth a look, right? So let's do that. But we may have to ultimately push it through probate to get it ratified, because if I executed a death deed and died shortly thereafter, capacity is the problem. If I did not give it to all of my children, that's a problem, right? So I'm going to, don't do a transfer on death deed. All right. So let's get into a couple of things. A trust into itself, right? A trust is a probate done soup to nuts before you die, right? So can you avoid probate by doing a trust? The answer is yes, right? But can people contest a trust? The answer is yes. In particular, if somebody's left out, they might go in. Chances of them winning are 0, but they're going to make the transaction really difficult to close. Okay, so I've got another trust issue. This is brand new, by the way, just happened last week. All right, and this is what I want you guys to really key in on. I have a transaction where I had an agent call me from our branch. David, you're going to remember this one in spades. Says, hey, came into the branch, I have a transaction, will you insure it? Okay, well, nobody walks into the branch who's a real estate agent and asks that question unless they know there was already a problem there. So in real time, I have the agent on the phone. I'm like, give me the details. I'm punching up the chain of title. And I'd noticed that 3 other title companies had open orders on this before he came to our doorstep. Red flag, red flag, red flag. It was rejected 3 times. But I'm game because I'll dig deeper. So I'm like, great, give me the details. Send me a copy of the trust. All the stuff is coming over, amendment to the trust. At the same time I'm reading the trust, I'm Googling the children's names, right? It's going to be, you two are going to be the son and daughter of the person in the trust, who's not dead yet, by the way, suffering from incapacity, 96 years old, lived in zip code 95129. Why do I know that? That's where I grew up. I knew the value of that property. Okay, so read the trust, great. Son, daughter, fantastic. Also successor trustees of the trust. Get to the amendment wipes you two out as being successor trustees and puts in another person. It's going to be you in this case. Guess what? You're a caregiver. Does that ring any bells? All right, this property, as I'm looking it up, is worth just shy of $3 million free and clear, right? Liquid assets attackable by anybody who wants to do so. So I'm like, okay, red flag. I Google your names. You live in Arizona, you live in Texas. Okay, so I know you're absentee. So still have the agent on the phone. I said, you know what? I'm reading this. I think I can do this transaction as long as the son and daughter approve of it. Caregiver goes ballistic, who's now the successor trustee and has a new durable power of attorney, which eradicated the old one. So I get a hold of the daughter, hang up the phone, call you, said, hey, I got a transaction, little weird, involves your dad, right? I just want to know what's going on. You go, my dad stopped talking to me 4 months ago. Do you know when that amendment was executed? 4 months ago. Went, wow, okay. I said, does your dad suffer from incapacity? She goes, yeah, he can't really make a lot of decisions. That's why me and my brother hired a full-time caregiver. We can't be there because we still have children. We have grandchildren to take care of in other states. So we hire somebody who's trusted to take care of them. All right, so I gave you the heads up. And then you called me back and said, I talked to my brother, we're on it. I'm like, fantastic, you need to, because they are actively trying to sell this property. I'm not doing the transaction. 3 other title companies rejected it. Didn't hear anything back. Okay, this past Monday, I ran the property and it sold. All cash for $2.9 million from a title company in Southern California. Title and escrow are separate in Southern California. Title officers are commissioned on transactions. See where I'm going? So now you guys have to figure out how you're going to get that $3 million back to a caregiver who's now long gone. That is the second time I've run into this in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. The other time, the person, the father in this case, may have died by odd means because the caregiver was trying to get control of the body to have it cremated rapidly while the son is living in Tennessee going time out, time out, time out. Okay, so that's why we can't ramrod things through, right? If I see a trust that is established in 1980s or 1990s, I automatically know the age of that person within parameters, which then I have to have the immediate suspicion of incapacity. All right, so when you read a prelim and you see a property's in a trust, that person is not the person representing the property in this case. Ask them, who are you? How are you related to the owner of this property? And under what authority are you acting? POA, successor trustee, some court order, something like that, and then we can avoid these things, right? But see, that's where I dig in. I go really deep to find people. Obviously, I found you guys. And that's the scary part. You Google somebody and like, oh, here's their cell phone. Here's this. Oh, there's a social security number. You got to watch out for that stuff, right? So a couple of other things. Must a trust on title be vested with a trustee's name? Many times we're seeing the 123 Main Street Trust. That is a void conveyance and cannot hold title. And I've had several attorneys go, well, that's the way I've always done it. I'm like, here's the civil codes that tell you you cannot do that, Mr. and Miss Attorney, right? Can we, again, communicate through this? Can we find ways to fix it? Yes. Am I going to tell you how to do that? Not here, but maybe on the phone separately. All right. Because if the assessor hasn't caught that that deed is invalid, do I want to give them the heads up because now everybody's dead? If they pass through, can we go through? Only if no one's harmed in avoiding going to court, meaning that who comes back and contests it? If I'm helping to facilitate everybody who should be made whole by this, being the children, right? If there's one child left out, can't do it. Everybody on board, everybody consents, we can move forward generally, right? But again, that's communication. That's why I'm doing these presentations, guys, as an underwriter. How many of you ever seen a title underwriter before? Yeah, no hands go up on that one. That's weird. All right. It's because no one wants to come out and say, we're here to help. Right. One last thing for you guys. Who here hasn't raised their hand today? Just a show of hands. Really? Okay. Everyone has now if you followed the directions there. All right. Any last questions or comments, guys? You will have access to these. Please feel free to follow up with me with anything you got. And Jules, take it away.
We'll get to questions in 1 second.
Yeah.
All right, just to wrap it up.
She's got to get this.
Just to wrap it up real quick, we do have access to some great tools for you. I know we're short on time, so we can kind of skip over them a bit. But we do have amazing access to property profiles, recorded documents, and all of that. So if you need access to do some initial research on the property when you're meeting with potential listings, let us know. We can get you set up. Jody will send out the slides for you. One other thing we have that I can send to you, if you grab my card here, is our follow-up flyer to this class. This has a list of important questions to be asking when you see the vestings in a trust. Scott kind of highlighted most of these, but these are some important ones to remember when looking at those. So this is a nice kind of reference sheet for you so you know to ask some important questions at the listing appointment. Finally, Mr. Scott Heisey.
Oh, there we go.
Is our underwriter and senior title officer extraordinaire. So again, you have access to his contact information. I'm Jules Bell. I'm one of the sales reps for Stewart Title here in Santa Clara County. We have, go to the microphone too. I totally forgot. Sorry, everyone. So I'm Jules Bell. We have 2 Stewart Title offices here in Santa Clara County as well as several locations around the Bay Area. And we can help you close on any transaction in California. So wherever you guys are doing business, we can help you out. My coworker David Lee is also here. He works with me in Santa Clara County, as well as Jamie, who's one of our escrow officers here in our Campbell branch. So feel free to reach out to any of us with any questions or concerns. And if Scott has a few more minutes, we can do some more Q&A here for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for attending.
And just really quickly to let you guys know, Zoom sent out a really bad update. So it crashed the system a couple times, so we
wiped it out.
apologize to those on Zoom. We're gonna try to piece the recording together for
Ah.
everyone. This last, I think, about 30 or 40 minutes of it was fine, so we apologize for that.
So I'm not sure which slide and it won't work anymore. Yeah, so if the deed, if the vesting's only in the name of the trust, it's not a valid deed, right? The trustee has to be named in the vesting for it to be a valid conveyance to the trust itself. So trustee has to be named. There's a civil code that says that is a void transaction. Well, a trustee's name, it doesn't have to be your name, but a trustee. If you picked a fiduciary, I'll give you a really quick example of that. Let's say women are being stalked by their exes and they want to buy property. So they may name their trust in an ambiguous way and then name an attorney as a fiduciary trustee for them. Therefore, they cannot be tracked from the records. That's a brilliant way to do it. Yes, sir.
I was gonna ask you, what's the cost of going through probate? Is it a percentage of the?
Yes,
asset,
of-
or
of-
is it a flat-
No, it's a percentage of the value of the estate. So an attorney can say, I think it's 10%, if I remember correctly, 4 or 10%. I'm not an attorney.
what the overall-
Well, it depends. So if it's a multi-million-dollar estate, it's going to be very expensive, right? Because it's based on that sort of thing. And that would include the attorney's fees. I think court costs are probably formulaic, right? So that they're a flat rate type of thing. But I couldn't give you that data. I haven't drilled down that far. Is there? There you go. Thank you.
$500 million estate, it's a very small amount to the rest.
There you go. Yeah, it's all relative then, right? At that point. Yes, sir.
A trust, the person has a trust, they die, but their bank accounts have a beneficiary that is not.
Oh, boy.
So the money in the bank account goes to the beneficiary. Is there still a way to come back? I mean, I don't know.
So here's the kicker on that. So if that bank account was listed as a trust asset, but it was only an oversight that they did not connect or tell the bank that, hey, this is now a trust account and get that, then I think there's some cause there. Now, you're hopeful is that the beneficiary and the beneficiary in the trust line up. If they do, no harm, no foul. If they do not, which was created first? Was the beneficiary mentioned first? So then the trust should override that as a separate decision. But you may have a conflict between those parties, but I can see the person named as beneficiary in the trust prevailing in that case. But we as outsiders cannot make that determination. That conflict has to be resolved.
So let me make it a little deeper.
Oh, boy.
The first trustee was the beneficiary, but because of her incapacity to be able to handle it, she turned it over to the ex-wife as the secondary.
Okay, right. So,
Now it's-
yeah, so again, you do have a conflict. Whether they're actually conflicting or not is irrelevant. You have a conflict of basically information. So I would talk to an estate attorney about that and go, okay, is there a workaround here? If they are cooperative, can somebody surrender that right in favor of somebody else? And that may be a potential way to go. Any other? Yes, sir.
Most of these topics that we're talking about for the person that we profit.
Right.
Issues coming from COVID. But my question is, you mentioned about the story about authorities doing on fraud. I think it not from the name of the trustee.
What's that now? The properties in,
They put all of the-
right,
They can use the name of the trustee, of the ego.
Right.
the trust.
right.
And that's not valid for you.
Well, on a deed, it must name a trustee of the trust. So it has to have both. It has to have so-and-so as trustee of the 123 Main Street Trust, right? That trustee has to be named for the conveyance to that trust to be valid. If they forget to put the trustee in there, that deed under the civil code is void, right? However, does the assessor's office know that not to pass through? Many of them don't. Some of them do, some of them don't. That's why we have to go, I've done this before. I call up the assessor's office and go, hey, I'm having trouble titling this property. Can you tell me who you have in title? And they go, oh yeah, it's the 123 Main Street Trust. I'm like, great, thanks for confirming that. So I know they've accepted that conveyance. Now, unless I have a reason to upset that apple cart, I might do an affidavit change of trustee or an affidavit death of trustee, record that, then name the trustee that should have been there in the first place, and then move forward from there. Because they didn't catch it, they can't really cry foul later on. The other part is, you guys keep in mind in this, when there's a problem with a conveyance, whether it's to a trust or any other thing, and the assessor rejects it or has an issue with it, they send out multiple letters. Again, my son tells me this. He goes, we send out 5 letters or something. He goes, that means that gives people like 3 months to respond. He goes, once they don't respond, I just reassess the property in whole and charge them. He goes, then they respond. Right? And he goes, will we back it up again? Yeah, but why not just catch it in the first place, right? So we do play a little bit of a tightrope walk on what they understand, what they don't understand, right? How can we wiggle through the system legitimately without causing any claims or legal matters, right? So again, I've 40 years experience. I kind of have some ways to work around things that don't trigger anything illegal. I'm not, that sounds like I'm slippery. I'm not. I'm just saying that most title companies, right? I'm going to tell you this. We're all under the same regulation. Title people in general, you've never seen one of me before, right? Their first word out of their mouth is, no, we can't do it, right? And I'm like, hang on, let's look at the problem from all angles. Is there a solution to the problem, right? That's why you guys get my phone number to go, I'm having a problem at Orange Coast Title. And you can call me and I can be a free second opinion in that. And if I can give you a good answer, you can take that answer back to that other title company and say, hey, I talked to this guy and he says he can do it this way. Chances are they're going to go, okay, we'll do it too, right? That's not the answer I want them to give you. I want you to come over here.
There's a question on Zoom.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm gonna say something about this when I ask this question.
Uh-oh.
It's, are there professional fiduciary duties that do shady activity? If so, is there a governing board or association to report them?
There is. I don't know it offhand. I know it does exist. They are bound by a code of ethics, right? Thing is, I had one situation where there was an appointed fiduciary because the 3 children who are the beneficiaries of the trust could not get along. They would not get along. They could not get along. And mom was incapacitated. Thus the reason for the fiduciary. 2 of the children had frustrated that fiduciary so much that she transferred trusteeship to one of the children who was initially barred from having any authority in the trust. Do you think that was a violation of their duties? Yes. Do you know where they are now? They're not a fiduciary anymore. Okay, so do they make mistakes? Yes. I believe if you Google that question, you will find who to report them to.
And we had somebody, my husband lives in the Portuguese community in San Jose, and supposedly there was someone going around to all the older people and becoming the fiduciary and becoming the trustee for all those older people. And when my husband found out who it was, he and his brother went to his office and sat there and threatened things probably, and got the trust transferred over to them. But they have no idea what happened to their grandparents' money. They have no idea what happened to anything.
There you go.
Other than they have the house.
There you go.
But yeah.
So,
It happens.
so again, remember what I said, that baby boomer demographic has more liquid equity in real estate than everybody else combined. They are massive targets right now. So, and the reason I'm telling you guys this mostly is because if you're representing a buyer in a situation like that, my policy covers the buyer for fraud, forgery, voidability of contract, and incapacity of the seller, which all exist in some of those things combined, right? So we have to go through that due diligence. I actually talked to the district attorney's office and they're like, you guys go that deep? I'm like, yeah, we have to go that deep. Now, mind you, Santa Clara County, I think they have a task force for this, but I think it's only manned by a couple of people, right? I'm seeing this weekly, if not daily. What do you think they're doing? Right? They're probably backed up. So we have these issues. So any last questions? Yes, ma'am.
Dies, and there's a death certificate, that has to be recorded to be valid, correct?
Well, for our purposes, right? To transfer an interest, we need to see it of record, which is called constructive notice. Back to the Tobias situation, right? So when we talked about that, when I died, for that joint tenancy to be valid for a title company, right? Even though the interest transfers upon the minute of death, right? Back to, listen, 1996, remember? The moment you died, it went to your ex-wife, even though his death was not perfected of record for 30 years. I couldn't go forward until his death was perfected, which we assisted in. Yes, sir.
Even when they're living with trusts, so the properties in the trust, they still have to do that.
No, actually, that's not necessarily true. Do we want to establish the death of the trustee? Yeah, because it's constructive notice and it's good. But if I can't, let me rephrase this a little bit. We have to have a death certificate, right? Have to see a death certificate. But many times it's hard to get a certified one. Let's say they were out of state or out of the country when they passed away, but I have a death certificate and it names the cause of death. If it shows the cause of death as pending, right, or under investigation, we cannot go further. However, let's say none of that exists. It was a heart attack while in Hawaii on vacation. I'd go, great, let's do an affidavit change of trustee. New trustee picks up the ball. We go forward. Let's perfect that later. So there's some wiggle room here. Yes.
All of these issues come up because the trust can be revoked.
Mhm.
But let's say at some point, the trust becomes non-revocable.
When they pass away or become incapacitated, it's a trigger point.
Then they decide trust is not.
True. They can do that.
If they do that, you avoid all these other guys and caretakers taking over.
But, well, not really. See, here's the kicker on that. That's a great question, by the way, right? Is that people who are scamming are playing outside the rules of the game, right? Remember in the case that I told you, they tried 3 local title companies who are too smart to let them get away with it. So they kept poking at a wall until they found the one that would. So should this person have gotten away with it? Absolutely not. But they were persistent, they changed their story, and they found a company who would do it, right? So it didn't work in that case. Back to your point, it should have, but it didn't. Now, should those children go after that title company for not doing their due diligence because the incapacity of seller, voidability of contract, fraud and forgery all existed there. So that buyer is now going to be a situation of losing $2.9 million, right? If those kids go back and attack, that whole transaction can be unwound. I hope they're smart enough to do that. I gave them the heads up. I don't know what they're doing. So, boy, I hate to end on a sour note like that. All right. But you guys, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you for playing.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Sure.
I think they have to, you're good, you know.
And an ex-husband. She doesn't like you on 2 reasons there, right?
I had a situation where the trust was so literally